Power and arrogance can blind a man so completely that he begins to believe no hand can reach him, no force can stop him, and no judgment can ever fall on his head. That is the most dangerous moment in any ruler's life. The moment he mistakes borrowed power for absolute power. He forgets that above every throne is a greater throne. Above every army is a greater command. And above every plan is the decree of Allah. There was once a king who marched with an army so massive that the deserts trembled beneath it, with war elephants like moving mountains and soldiers hardened for conquest. He thought he was walking toward an easy victory. He did not know he was marching straight into one of the most terrifying signs ever shown to mankind. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel, turn on the bell, and stay with this story until the end. Because what happened to the people of the elephant is not just history. It is a warning to every arrogant soul, a lesson for every age, and a reminder that when Allah protects something, no army on earth can destroy it. When power enters the heart without gratitude, it turns into tyranny. When ambition grows without humility, it becomes rebellion. And when a person begins to see sacred things as obstacles to his own glory, his destruction may already have begun even while he still thinks he is winning. Nearly 15 centuries ago, in the southern lands of Arabia, a ruler arose whose name became forever tied to one of the most shocking punishments recorded in sacred memory. His name was Abraha al-Ashram. Abraha ruled Yemen under the authority of the Negus of Abyssinia, the Christian ruler of the kingdom that corresponds to parts of present-day Ethiopia and Eritrea. He was not weak, and he was not foolish. In fact, he was sharp, calculating, politically skilled, and deeply ambitious. He understood that control was not gained by the sword alone. To rule hearts, a man had to redirect love, loyalty, movement, and wealth. He looked carefully at Arabia and noticed a pattern that returned year after year with astonishing force. In the sacred month, tribes from every direction traveled toward Makkah. They crossed burning valleys, jagged mountains, and endless sands. All because in Makkah stood the Kaaba, the ancient house associated with Ibrahim and revered across Arabia. It was not only a place of worship, it was the center of attention, the focus of longing, the axis of spiritual honor. And through that honor came commerce, prestige, and influence. This deeply disturbed Abraha. He could not bear that a simple cube-shaped house in the desert held such power over men's hearts while Yemen, with all its beauty and resources, stood behind it. Jealousy entered his chest, and jealousy, when mixed with political ambition, can push a man toward madness, while he still calls it strategy. He decided that he would break Makkah's attraction and transfer it to Yemen. If the people could be made to gather somewhere else, then the spiritual and economic center of Arabia would shift. Trade would shift, status would shift, memory would shift, and in his mind, history itself would bend in his favor. So he ordered the construction of a magnificent cathedral in Sana'a. He poured wealth into it, labor into it, and pride into every wall. Reports describe it as towering, dazzling, and adorned with costly materials. Precious woods were brought in. Stones were polished, decorations shone. Fine craftsmanship gave the building a grandeur meant to overwhelm the eye. It was not merely a place of worship. It was a statement. It was an attempt to rival what could not be rivaled by architecture alone. Abraha wanted the Arabs to look at this cathedral and forget the Kaaba. He wanted their footsteps to change direction. He wanted devotion to be redirected by spectacle. When the building was completed, Abraha is said to have written to the Negus with enormous pride, boasting that he had built a sanctuary the like of which did not exist anywhere else in the region, and that he intended to turn the pilgrimage of the Arabs away from Makkah and toward Yemen. What he saw as political brilliance was, in truth, the beginning of his downfall. Because the problem was not a building. The problem was that he had set his heart against the house that Allah had honored. News of Abraha's intention spread swiftly. Arabia was a land of tribes, rivalries, and scattered loyalties. But on this issue, emotion ran deep. The Kaaba was not an ordinary structure to the people of the peninsula. Even in their ignorance and their tribal divisions, they recognized its sanctity and its connection to their forefather Ibrahim. They knew its place in their memory and their geography. They knew what it meant. So when Abraha's boast reached the Arabs, anger moved through them like fire across dry grass. According to traditional reports, A man from Banu Kinana was so enraged by this insult that he secretly traveled to Yemen. Under the cover of night, he entered Abraha's grand cathedral and defiled it, humiliating the monument that had been built to compete with the Kaaba. Some narrations also mention that damage and burning followed, and that parts of the structure were left dishonored and ruined. Whether through direct desecration, fire, or both, the message was unmistakable. The Arabs would not accept this challenge quietly. When Abraha saw what had happened to the sanctuary into which he had poured his pride, rage consumed him. This was no longer merely about prestige. Now it was personal. His plan had been mocked, his symbol had been shamed, his authority had been challenged by people he already viewed as beneath him. In that furious state, he made the decision that sealed his name in history. He swore that he would march to Makkah and destroy the Kaaba itself. He would level it, tear it apart, and erase the source of the honor that had eclipsed his own. Preparations began immediately, and they were immense. This was not a raiding party and not a small punitive mission. It was a demonstration of force on a scale Arabia had rarely seen. Abraha assembled a large army, described in many accounts as numbering in the tens of thousands. At its front were elephants, enormous beasts brought from Abyssinia, animals that the Arabs of the peninsula were unaccustomed to facing in war. Camels they knew, horses they knew, tribal skirmishes they knew, but elephants were something else entirely. Massive bodies of terror that could shatter formations and break morale before battle even began. Among these elephants was the most famous of them all, a huge beast remembered in many reports by the name Mahmud. It stood as a symbol of the army's confidence, the crushing force that would lead the advance. With soldiers, equipment, animals, and iron resolve, the expedition set out toward the north, through the lands that stood between Yemen and Makkah. As the army advanced, the desert carried the news ahead of it. Fear spread through Arabia. Independent tribes understood that this was not just a threat to one city. If Abraha could reach Makkah, destroy the Kaaba, and return victorious, the balance of honor in Arabia would change forever. Some tribes attempted resistance. Men gathered, motivated by outrage, by honor, or by reverence for the sacred house. But courage alone is not always enough against overwhelming force. One respected Arab leader, Deen, rallied people to oppose Abraha. He and those who joined him stood in the invaders' path and tried to halt the march. But the army coming from Yemen was too strong, too organized, and too heavily equipped. The resisting force was defeated, and Deen was captured. His failure did not end the attempts. Farther along the route, another leader, Nufail ibn Habib al-Kathami, rose with men from his people to challenge Abraha's advance. Once again battle broke out. Once again the result favored the larger, more powerful army. Nufail too was captured. The march continued. Obstacle after obstacle was swept aside. Resistance flickered, but it could not stop the column pressing toward its objective. When Abraha approached the region of Ta'if, the people there recognized the danger of direct confrontation. Unable to defeat him, they chose self-preservation. They distanced themselves from the Kaaba and sought to protect their own interests by cooperating. A guide was appointed to show the way toward Makkah. In some reports, this guide is remembered with shame. His name preserved in disgrace because he helped lead the aggressor toward the sacred precinct. Step by step, the army drew near until it camped at Al-Magamas, close enough that Makkah stood under immediate threat. From there, Abraha sent horsemen to the outskirts of the city. They seized property, looted livestock, and spread fear among the people. Among the animals taken were 200 camels belonging to Abd al-Muttalib ibn Hashim, chief of Quraysh and caretaker of the Kaaba, and the grandfather of the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, who would be born in that same year. Then Abraha sent a message to Makkah. The message was chilling in its simplicity. He said he had not come to fight the people unless they stood in his way. His purpose, he declared, was only to destroy the house. If the people did not resist, their blood would be spared. It was the language of calculated intimidation. Submit, stand aside, and watch your sanctuary fall. The message reached Abd al-Muttalib. He was a man of dignity, authority, and natural nobility. Tradition describes him as commanding in appearance, respected among his people, and possessed of a presence that impressed even enemies. But he also understood the reality in front of him. Quraysh was not in a position to meet Abraha's army on open ground and defeat it. A clash would lead to slaughter. So he did not answer with reckless boasting. He answered with clarity. They did not have the strength to fight such a force. As for the Kaaba, it had a Lord who would protect it. After this, Abd al-Muttalib went personally to Abraha's camp. The meeting that followed became one of the most memorable exchanges in sacred history. When Abd al-Muttalib entered, Abraha was struck by his bearing. The man standing before him did not look broken, hysterical, or desperate. He carried himself with calm authority. Some narrations mention that Abraha, impressed by his appearance, stepped down from his elevated seat and sat with him on a carpet, unwilling to speak to such a noble figure while remaining aloof on his throne. Then Abraha asked through an interpreter, "What do you want?" Abd al-Muttalib replied that the king's men had taken 200 of his camels, and he had come to ask for their return. Abraha was stunned. Contempt flashed across his face. In his mind, this was proof that the Arabs lacked seriousness. Here he was, ready to destroy the most sacred place in Makkah, and the chief of Quraysh was speaking about livestock. It seemed small, even absurd, to him. He is reported to have said that when he first saw Abd al-Muttalib, he respected him. But after hearing his request, that respect fell away. How could a man not speak first for his sanctuary? What came next has echoed through centuries because of its simplicity and its faith. Abd al-Muttalib answered, "I am the owner of the camels, so I ask for what belongs to me. As for the house, it has a Lord who will protect it." In that sentence was a world of certainty. Not arrogance, not empty defiance. Certainty. He did not claim power he did not possess. He did not pretend that Quraysh would save the Kaaba by force. He acknowledged his own limits and entrusted the matter to its true owner. Abraha responded with arrogance, insisting that no one would stop him. But Abd al-Muttalib had already placed the affair where it belonged. Abraha returned the camels. Abd al-Muttalib returned to Makkah. There he ordered the people to leave the city and seek refuge in the surrounding mountains. This was not abandonment born of disbelief. It was wisdom. Human beings take the means they can, and then they rely upon Allah for what lies beyond those means. The people withdrew, climbing to elevated places from which they could watch, wait, pray, and survive whatever came at dawn. Before leaving, Abd al-Muttalib stood at the Kaaba, took hold of the ring of its door, and made a prayer that rose from helplessness into trust. He asked Allah to protect his own house. He declared that every man protects his property. So let the Lord of the house protect his sanctuary from the people of the cross and their oppression. Then he departed to the heights with the rest of Quraysh, while below them the plain waited in silence for what the morning would bring. Night passed. The invaders prepared. Orders were readied. Equipment was arranged. Men expected triumph. They imagined that the coming day would end with the Kaaba broken and Makkah humiliated. But just as arrogance often mistakes delay for weakness, they mistook the silence before dawn for the absence of divine response. When the command was finally given to advance, a startling event took place. Mahmud, the lead elephant, the great beast meant to crush the path toward the Kaaba, refused to move in that direction. It knelt down and would not rise. The handlers beat it. They drove hooks into it. They struck it and pushed it with violence. Yet it remained fixed, as though an unseen weight held it down. Then they turned it away from Makkah, and it stood. They directed it toward Yemen, and it moved. They pointed it toward another direction, and it responded. But every time they aimed it back toward the sacred house, it dropped down again and refused to proceed. The army was shaken by confusion. Why would the beast obey everywhere except on the road to Makkah? Some narrations mention that Nufail, the Arab leader who had earlier been captured, approached the elephant and spoke near its ear, telling it to kneel or return safely, for it stood before the sacred precinct of Allah. Whether by direct address or by instinct placed into it by divine will, the result was the same. The most powerful animal in the expedition would not lead an assault against the Kaaba. And then the sign from heaven appeared. From the direction of the sea, the sky darkened with what at first could be mistaken for a cloud. But this was no cloud. It was movement, layer upon layer, flock upon flock. the air filling with birds unlike anything the army had anticipated. They came in formations. They came in numbers. They came under command greater than any king's. These were the birds remembered in the Quran as Tayran-e-Babel. Birds in successive groups, waves of living projectiles filling the sky over the doomed invaders. Each bird carried small stones, according to the traditional descriptions, one in its beak and one in each claw. Tiny things, not large boulders, not thunderbolts, not flaming spears. Small stones. That was part of the terror. Allah did not need massive weapons to destroy massive pride. He could humble a mighty army with what seemed insignificant. Such is the way divine judgment shatters illusions. The thing you mock becomes the thing that ends you. Then the birds released their stones. What followed was panic beyond language. The stones struck with unnatural devastation. Men were hit and collapsed. Flesh tore. Bodies were ruined. Ranks dissolved. Screams spread through the plain. Horses bolted. Elephants convulsed. Order disappeared. The army that had come in disciplined confidence became a landscape of horror in moments. Those who had marched to erase the sacred house found themselves erased instead. The Quran describes these stones as from sijil, a term traditionally understood to refer to hardened clay or baked stone. Whatever their physical form, their effect was catastrophic. The invaders could not defend themselves against what descended from above. Their armor did not save them. Their numbers did not save them. Their strategy did not save them. Their elephants did not save them. Nothing in their military power could answer the decree that had come upon them. The plain turned into a field of death. Some men fell where they stood. Others fled in blind terror, scattering southward in broken remnants. But flight did not guarantee survival. The punishment continued upon them. Traditional imagery describes them becoming like chewed straw, like withered stalks reduced to useless fragments, an image preserved in Surah Al-Fil itself. The same army that had marched in grandeur was reduced to something trampled, torn, and thrown aside. Abraha himself did not escape. Some reports describe that he was struck directly, while many others emphasize a lingering destruction in his body as he retreated. The surviving men dragged their ruler away, trying to bring him back toward Sana'a. But what returned was not a conqueror. It was a living example of humiliation. His body began to decay, flesh separated, limbs weakened, wounds spread, pus and blood emerged. Piece by piece his strength left him. He had set out like a giant and came back like a warning. By the time he reached Yemen, he was finished, consumed by the very judgment he had provoked. As for Makkah, the Kaaba still stood. From the mountain heights, Abd al-Muttalib and the people of Quraysh witnessed what no poet could have fully prepared them for. They had seen fear in the night, helplessness before dawn, and then the impossible by morning. They learned again that the house did not stand because men guarded it perfectly. It stood because Allah willed it to stand. The owner of the house had defended his sanctuary in a manner no tribe could have imagined. That year became known throughout Arabia as the Year of the Elephant. It was etched into memory, not because of a festival or a treaty, but because the desert itself had become the stage for a divine sign. And in that same year, not long after the destruction of Abraha's army, the child was born who would change human history forever. Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him. The protected city would soon become the birthplace of the final prophet. In that sequence there is a profound meaning. Before the messenger appeared, the Lord of the Kaaba displayed before Arabia that this house was under his protection. This land had a purpose, and history was being prepared for a revelation greater than kings, armies, and cathedrals. The story of the people of the elephant is therefore not merely a tale of punishment. It is a lesson in scale. Human beings are dazzled by numbers, equipment, reputation, and spectacle. We see an army and imagine inevitability. We see wealth and imagine permanence. We see a ruler on a throne and imagine security. But the story strips away those illusions. One command from Allah can overturn every visible advantage. One moment of divine decree can turn certainty into terror and strength into ruin. It is also a lesson in the nature of arrogance. Abraha was not destroyed only because he marched with an army. Many kings have marched with armies. He was destroyed because he believed his ambition could displace what Allah had honored. He believed grandeur built by human hands could compete with sanctity established by divine decree. He believed he could redirect devotion by force, erase memory by violence, and challenge the sacred without consequence. That is the essence of arrogance. To see yourself as free from accountability while standing beneath the sky of Allah. And notice the contrast in this story. On one side stands Abraha with his calculations, architecture, soldiers, horses, elephants, and imperial confidence. On the other stands Abd al-Muttalib with truthfulness about his own weakness and certainty about his Lord. One side trusted visible force. The other trusted the unseen protection of Allah. One side came down from Yemen with plans. The other went up into the mountains with prayer. One side believed the matter was already decided. The other knew the matter had not even truly begun until Allah judged it. Even the elephant itself becomes a sign in the story. Men are often more rebellious than beasts. The lead elephant refused to proceed against the sanctuary, while the men pushing it insisted on the attack. It is as though creation sometimes recognizes boundaries that arrogance in the human heart refuses to see. A beast sensed what tyrants ignored. A creature without human speech became part of a divine rebuke against men who had speech, rank, and reason, yet used all of it to oppose the sacred. Then there are the birds. Small, fragile in appearance, easy for a soldier to dismiss. Yet Allah made them the carriers of destruction. This should make every proud person tremble. The means by which you may be broken need not appear grand. Allah can send your downfall through what you mock, through what you overlook, through what your pride tells you does not matter. The army of Abraha likely expected resistance from men with swords. They did not expect death from the sky in the beaks and claws of birds. So too in life, punishment may come from a direction the arrogant never prepared for, because they were too busy admiring their own strength. There is another dimension to this event that should not be missed. The Kaaba at that time was surrounded by a people not yet guided by Islam in its final form. Yet Allah still protected his house. Why? Because his wisdom moves beyond the immediate condition of the people present around a place. He knew what was coming. He knew that from this city the final revelation would rise. He knew that from this sanctuary the call to pure monotheism would be restored. He knew that the one soon to be born there would cleanse the house of idols and return it to the worship of Allah alone. So the protection of the Kaaba in the year of the elephant was also protection of a future decree not yet visible to men. And that is one of the deepest comforts for believers. Allah does not only protect what we already understand. Sometimes He protects destinies we have not yet seen, futures we cannot yet imagine, doors that have not yet opened. A person may look at events in the present and think all is vulnerable, all is threatened, all is slipping away, but beyond what the eye can measure. Allah may already be preserving the path for a greater unfolding. The event also strengthened the position of Makkah among the Arabs. The city's honor grew. The sanctity of the Kaaba was magnified in their eyes. They had seen that something beyond tribal power surrounded this house. This was no longer only inherited reverence. It had become witnessed evidence. Men talk loudly about bravery, but when an entire army collapses under heavenly punishment, the desert remembers. For us today, the story remains alive because its pattern repeats in every age. There are always people who believe influence is everything, that wealth can replace truth, that institutions can overwrite revelation, that what Allah has honored can be pushed aside by propaganda, force, or spectacle. There are always hearts seduced by the illusion that visible dominance means final victory. But the story of Abraha stands like a wall before all such delusions. It declares that no matter how carefully arrogance plans, it still remains small beneath the decree of Allah. It also asks each of us a personal question. Where does arrogance live in us? Perhaps not at the scale of a king with elephants, but in subtler ways. In the way we speak, in the way we assume we are safe from accountability, in the way we resist correction, in the way we place our plans above obedience, in the way we imagine our position, our intelligence, or our resources make us untouchable. Every heart must hear in this story a warning. Do not let pride carry you into conflict with what Allah has made sacred. At the same time, every believer should hear in it a reassurance. You may look weak in worldly terms. You may not have the army, the numbers, the influence, or the platform. You may stand, as Quraysh stood that night, unable to produce the means you wish you had. But weakness in your hands does not mean weakness in your Lord. When the matter truly belongs to Allah, He can defend in ways that shatter imagination. Your duty is not to pretend you are all-powerful. Your duty is to be truthful, to take what means you can, to humble yourself, and to trust the one whose decree no army can resist. So remember the man who built the towering cathedral, thinking height would create holiness. Remember the ruler who gathered soldiers and elephants, thinking force would silence sanctity. Remember the chief who asked only for his camels and left the house to its lord. Remember the elephant that would move in any direction except toward the Kaaba. Remember the sky darkening with birds. Remember the small stones that undid a giant army. Remember the tyrant returning home in pieces. Remember the house still standing. Remember the year that made way for the birth of Muhammad. Peace and blessings be upon him. This is not a legend of exaggeration. It is a warning written into sacred memory. The fall of arrogance is certain, and the protection of Allah is real. Empires rise and collapse. Cathedrals glitter and fade. Armies march and vanish. But what Allah preserves remains preserved until He wills otherwise. The people of the elephant came to erase a sign, and they themselves became the sign. If this story increased your faith, strengthened your awe of Allah's power, and reminded you that no force can overcome His decree, then support the channel, leave a comment, and share this message with someone who needs to hear it. And whenever you think the arrogant look too strong, remember the morning when birds turned an army into chewed straw. And know with certainty that Allah is never overpowered, never unaware, and never absent from the affairs of His creation.